Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into an absolutely beautiful and incredibly sophisticated perspective on the human mind and spirit. This material was carefully compiled by a seeker named Mirali Shah for the Inner Horizon podcast, and it explores something called the compass under the rubble. We're talking about a 1,200-year-old science of the soul that, quite frankly, is going to completely shift how you understand your own inner life. Let's get right into it.
I want to hook you immediately with this incredible quote. Jo ragaj, tumhe apni kamiyon ki taraf khinch rahe hai. The friction that keeps pulling you back to your own flaws is not evidence of your brokenness. It is the vital sign of a living soul. I mean, just sit with that for a second. If you've been feeling deeply exhausted by your own flaws lately, well, you're going to see exactly why that exhaustion isn't a failure at all. It's actually a massive sign of spiritual vitality.
You know, there's this really fascinating paradox in how we live today. As a culture, we have literally never been more psychologically literate, right? We know all the buzzwords, boundaries, triggers, trauma responses, coping mechanisms. And honestly, we can be highly functional all day long. We hit our metrics, we manage our routines, we are totally, relentlessly optimized. But when the lights go out, we so often feel just entirely hollow. It's like our modern tools are great at keeping us surviving, but they totally miss something much deeper.
Which leaves us staring at a pretty piercing question. What is my heart actually for? Our modern clinical tools are super precise at keeping the machine running, but they kind of fall flat when it comes to answering the why behind it all. So we're going to look at how history somehow lost the answer to this, and more importantly, we're going to explore a tradition that never separated the two in the first place.
If you open up a standard university psychology textbook today, the timeline basically jumps from Plato and Aristotle in 400 BC directly to Wilhelm Wundt in 1879. Now, that 1,000-year blank space? That isn't just a historical fact, it's a massive historical erasure. Because right in the middle of that gap, classical Islamic scholars were building this extraordinarily sophisticated dual-stream paradigm. They didn't silo the clinical science of the mind away from the spiritual anatomy of the soul. No, they studied and treated both of them together.
And honestly, looking back shows just how insanely advanced they were. Way back in 850 CE, a physician named Abu Zaid al-Bakhtī coined the term ishtibak, which translates to entanglement. So centuries before the West even conceptualized psychosomatic illness, al-Bakhtī already understood the deep, intense entanglement between the physical body and the soul. And this wasn't just theory, it was applied medicine. In these massive hospitals called bimadistans, they treated physical illness right alongside psychological distress. They used running fountains, botanical gardens, and occupational therapy to truly honor the deep dignity of every single patient.
To really grasp the difference between these approaches, think of a simple house metaphor. Modern psychology, it's kind of like a team of extraordinarily skilled tradesmen fixing the infrastructure of your house, the plumbing, the electrical, the drywall. And when they leave, hey, the house is highly functional. But the Islamic tradition steps back and asks, well, what about the occupant? Because the house isn't actually the point, the person living inside it is the point. This ancient tradition focuses entirely on caring for and healing the occupant's soul.
Because of that focus, the ultimate destination here isn't just basic functionality, it's something called qalb salim, a sound heart. Now, a merely functioning heart just pumps blood and keeps your physical body alive. But a sound heart, that is one that's been deeply purified of spiritual diseases. It operates exactly as it was designed to, which is to perceive objective truth, to perceive the real.
Section 1. Anatomy of the Inner Life. The 4 components of the soul.
Okay, component 1 is the nafs. This is the part of the self that wants. It's home to your appetites, your drives, your urges. Now, the modern Western reflex is to look at the nafs and say, oh, that's Freud's dark, chaotic id. We have to repress that. But the Islamic tradition looks at it radically differently. Think of the nafs more like a wild, powerful horse. You don't shoot a wild horse. You patiently break it in, you train it. And eventually, a disciplined nafs actually becomes the powerful drive that carries you forward on your entire spiritual journey.
Component 2 is the qalb, the heart, and we really need to strip away all those modern romanticized Valentine's Day notions of the heart here. In this tradition, the qalb is quite literally an organ of sight. It's the supreme organ of spiritual perception. The word itself translates to turn over, because it's constantly reacting and flipping toward whatever it is we expose it to. And because it's an organ of sight, it can actually suffer from clinical spiritual blindness. Things like riya, which is the disease of doing good deeds just to show off for human approval, literally blind it.
Component 3 is the ruh, the divine breath within our human architecture. From a clinical perspective, it is absolutely vital to understand that the ruh itself is pristine. It simply cannot be damaged by worldly trauma. However, our connection to it, that can be severely starved. See, the root doesn't feed on dopamine hits, or calories, or social status. It is nourished strictly by divine things, like remembrance and prayer. So if you're walking around with this gnawing inner emptiness that no amount of shopping or scrolling can fix, your root isn't broken. It's just starving underneath all the noise of the world.
And the fourth component is the fitra. This is that primal, inborn compass we all have, pointing straight toward truth and the divine. And its absolute defining characteristic? It is completely indestructible. You can bury it under decades of trauma, terrible habits, deep cynicism, but you cannot destroy it. The clinical implication here is just immense. It means you can never, ever fully write anyone off. And yes, that includes yourself. No matter how much rubble is piled on top, that little compass is quietly broadcasting its signal, pointing you home.
So now that we know the components, let's look at the actual journey of that wild horse we talked about, the nafs. It moves through 3 distinct states. First up is Amara, the commanding self. This is when the horse is totally wild and reactive. There is zero space between a trigger and your reaction. But the very second you notice your failure and feel bad about it, boom, you've leveled up into the second state, Lawama, the reproaching self. This is where that inner friction happens. It's exhausting for sure, but it is exactly where all real growth occurs. And the ultimate destination is the third state, Mutmaina, the deeply rooted self at rest.
Now, that middle state of growth, Lawama, is totally essential, but it is prone to some pretty dangerous malfunctions. On one hand, you have waswasa, which is inward obsession and self-torture. You know the feeling, lying awake at 2 a.m., absolutely convincing yourself you're a terrible person. That's not pious reflection, guys. That's just the ego chewing on itself. On the flip side, you have outward policing. This is when you obsess over the tiny flaws of everyone else so you don't have to face your own inner mess. In both of these traps, the ego is basically wearing a costume of piety, but it's really just feeding its own arrogance.
So, you're probably wondering, how do you know if you're actually approaching that final state, mutmaina, the self at rest? Well, the definitive diagnostic test is a single question. How do you react to human opinion? True, profound internal tranquility means that glowing praise doesn't inflate your ego, and harsh criticism doesn't crush your spirit. Both of them just kind of pass right through you. You notice them, sure, but they don't destabilize your center. You're firmly rooted.
To help us actually get to that rooted state, this tradition gives us an incredibly practical tool, muhasaba, the daily audit. This is a rigorous self-accounting that you do at the end of every single day. But here is the absolute critical rule. You have to do this without allowing yourself a single excuse. And this isn't about moralizing or feeling guilty. It's literally psychological engineering. Excuses are just armor for the ego. When you finally take radical responsibility, you shift your entire posture from defense to openness. And that is exactly when true tauba, repentance, and returning to the divine can finally begin.
Let's see how this ancient map diagnoses something super common today. Take imposter syndrome. Modern psychology usually calls it a self-esteem deficit, but this tradition reveals a real game changer. Imposter syndrome and arrogance are actually both masks for kibar, or pride. Why? Because they both fixate obsessively on human validation. Think about it. Arrogance thinks, I am better than everyone here, while imposter syndrome thinks, everyone here is going to find out I'm a total fraud. Both of them are just the cob looking sideways at the crowd instead of looking upward. Shift your gaze upward and honestly, both of them just evaporate.
Section 2. Suluk, the lifelong journey of the soul.
This lifelong traversal across your inner landscape is known as suluk. It's the practical, day-in, day-out walk from heedlessness toward profound closeness and intimacy with the divine. And it has some pretty strict parameters. There are basically 3 rules of the road. First, it takes a really long time. There are no 30-day life hacks here. The walking itself is the healing. Second, you cannot do it alone. You absolutely need suhba, or companionship, because we all have blind spots and we need mirrors to help us see them. And third, order matters. If you try to skip the daily, grinding discipline of training that wild horse just to chase spiritual highs, well, you're going to contract spiritual arrogance, which is the deadliest inner disease of all.
And this brilliantly brings our whole narrative full circle. The friction is the vital sign. If you feel overwhelmed by your flaws, if you are just exhausted by the inner friction of trying, messing up, and having to try all over again, reframe that right now. That is not a symptom of your brokenness. It is the literal evidence of your soul waking up and going to work. The exhaustion you feel is the beautiful, necessary exhaustion of a soul doing its actual job.
फितरा मालबे के नीचे दफन हो सकती है, तोड़ी नहीं जा सकती. The fitra can be buried under rubble, it cannot be destroyed. I really want you to take this profound validation with you today. No matter what you've gone through, no matter what you've done or the messy habits you've built up over the years, your internal compass remains completely intact. The signal is still there. It's broadcasting underneath all that debris, just waiting for you to start clearing it away.
We're going to end on this final, pretty provocative thought. क्या हो अगर असल कामयाबी का वाहिद बैरूनी पैमाना सिर्फ ये हो कि जब हम इस दुनिया से रुखसत हों तो हमारे सीने में धड़कने वाला वो कल्ब कितना शफ़ाफ है? What if the only real measure of success is how transparent the qalb beating in our chest is when we finally depart this world? I really invite you to keep exploring that inner horizon and to keep returning to your indestructible compass. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this incredible 1200-year-old science.